It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Hilton Grove. I was sitting in my small, slightly cluttered apartment, the aroma of strong coffee filling the air, soothing me as I sipped it from my favorite chipped mug. The sunlight shone through my window like fingers reaching into my space, highlighting every dust particle that danced through the air. I had my favorite playlist softly playing in the background, creating a rhythmic backdrop to my quiet morning routine. I didn't even bother opening my laptop. Today felt different. I allowed myself to stay in this moment, blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold. My thumb scrolled effortlessly through messages on my phone, a habit formed from years of modern connectivity, each notification hinting at mundane exchanges with friends or work reminders. Just as I settled into the comfort of my solitude, my cell phone buzzed persistently on the table. I glanced at the screen and froze when I saw the number my father. A feeling of trepidation washed over me, cold and heavy, as I recognized that tone from our last call, the unspoken weight of his usual cheer replaced with something darker. With a trembling hand, I picked up the phone, the device feeling suddenly heavier, much like the dread that settled in my stomach. "Hello," I managed to say, trying to mask the quivers in my voice. The voice that greeted me was heavy with grief, drenched in sorrow that made my heart pound against my ribcage. "Mia, it's your dad," he said, the quiver in his tone palpable, a sound I dreaded even before he spoke the next words. "I have some bad news. Aunt Ruth has passed away." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, emptiness swirling with confusion in my consciousness. This news should have struck a deeper chord. Aunt Ruth had been 97 years old. She'd lived a long, full life, yet I felt this dissonance in my chest, reminiscent of the spaces between notes in a broken melody. As he began to explain the arrangements for the funeral, I caught myself swallowing hard, feeling guilt twist in my stomach like a knife eddying within me. The longer he spoke, the more I realized how little I really knew about Aunt Ruth, or really, how little she knew about me. A blur of memories rushed through my mind, framed by an outdated photograph that sat in a dusty corner of my childhood home. I could hardly picture her face. "You should come, Mia. It's important to be with family in times like these," he urged. His words felt like chains, links of obligation that threatened to hold me down. I could feel that weight pressing on my shoulders, every part of me screaming to just decline the invitation, and yet guilt gripped me tighter than ever before. I listened as he spoke about family coming together during dark times, a tired echo ringing hollow in my heart. Conflicted, I sat back down and pinched the bridge of my nose, willing myself to concentrate. I had plans, aspirations clawing for my attention, dreams blooming in my heart that I yearned to chase. I had carved out a small life for myself, structured and safe, and yet here was my father, shattered and pleading, and I was torn apart inside. I felt like I stood at a junction with no signs, no direction. "Mia, please, it would mean so much to your mother and I," he said. Hearing that brought a fresh wave of nostalgia, a longing for the times when family felt like a simple puzzle with fitting pieces, which now felt turned upside down and scattered all over the place. "I'll think about it," I mumbled, hoping it would be enough to quell his urging, but already knowing I was being pulled into the family chaos. The conflict intensified within me as the funeral day crept closer, carving grooves in my mind like heavy raindrops on the pavement. I did not just mourn for Aunt Ruth. I felt this rising tide of loss for the strained family dynamics that loomed above me like dark clouds ready to burst. Each evening that passed brought with it a flurry of thoughts that whirled in my head like leaves caught in a storm. What face would I wear? Would they see me as an outsider? Would they even recognize the person I had become? Each family gathering left me feeling like a ghost, an outsider drifting through a tight-knit group that looked so successful on the surface yet harbored secrets that smelled like decay. Annoying unease nestled in my gut. I kept asking myself why I felt so torn between honoring my father's wishes and chasing my own ambitions. That unsightly truth lurked in the shadows of my mind like a whisper, clawing for my attention. My father had been unfaithful to my mother for years. The sharp sting of betrayal boiled beneath my skin, throbbing like an open wound, ever since I had overheard that hushed, late-night conversation between them while I pretended to read in the other room. It had unfolded like a tragic play, his voice low, the familiar cadence softened by the weight of secrets spilling into the dark air. "It just happened, dear," he had said, each word like shattered glass. "You are making this too complicated." I had frozen in disbelief, emotions swirling until the pots of anger and disappointment bubbled over, leaving me gasping for clarity. Now Aunt Ruth's funeral would become a breeding ground for the questions that remained unspoken within our family. Could I bear to face the hypocrisy? Would I hold my head high as my father, a man who had held my hand and promised me the world, secretly dangled our family's trust in front of a far different reality? I suddenly felt apprehensive about the thin line separating love and betrayal, torn between my loyalty to my mother and my obligation to my father. By the time I arrived at the venue, it was as if gravity had doubled. The heaviness in the air was palpable, a blanket of unspoken words wrapping around us like a dense fog. I stood in the back, my heart racing like a trapped bird, watching as relatives filed in, whispers buzzing quietly around me like the soft hum of a failing light bulb. Each face told a story, Every kindness, every harshness, every fleeting glance layered with unresolved emotions floated in the air, intertwining with the melancholic scent of flowers and incense that saturated the room. My father's gaze searched the crowd, and I felt that searing focus land on me, piercing through layers of uncertainty like a dart. A chill crept down my spine as I turned my head quickly, avoiding any eye contact, feeling that familiar shroud of shame wash over me. The way his eyes darted about, that desperate search for some semblance of comfort from me, only amplified my discomfort. Each moment felt like an eternity. I tried to read the expressions around me, the confusion, sorrow, and a hint of suppressed judgment etched into familiar faces that studied me like a faded painting. The emotional undercurrents twisted and coiled, lurking behind friendly smiles and sympathetic words. I felt the weight of my own failure to connect reverberate through my bones. The nagging sensation of betrayal churned within me, each heartbeat a drum, reminding me that the funeral itself had become my battlefield. As I watched the procession at the front, a part of me wanted to flee, to escape the overwhelming feelings encasing me as I sunk deeper into the shadows of the room. I turned my gaze away from the gathering on the front stage, the casket closed, decorated with beautiful white lilies that looked almost too pristine for the reality it held. My mind flickered back to the chaotic thoughts of my childhood, filling the crevices that made me feel small and forgotten. Mia, there are just some things you can't control, my father's voice had always said. Had he ever truly understood that the things we can't control often fester like wounds beneath the surface? I could feel my skin prickling with tension. The anguish of loss bounced between those gathered, and I could only stand there feeling hollow. My throat felt dry, and I found myself focusing on the floral arrangement, counting the petals as though they held the secrets to my turmoil. But instead of petals, all I found were questions begging for answers. What do I really stand for in this family? And at what cost would I defend my father's honor when his betrayal threatened the fragile bond I held with my mother? As the service started, gratitude washed over me that the attention had shifted from where I stood to the front. I took a deep breath, trying to anchor myself in the moment, allowing emotions to twist and spill like ink drops on a page. Even as hymns played softly in the background, the melancholy laced through me like a river too deep to wade through. My mind raced. This was not just about Aunt Ruth. It was about facing my own ghosts, the lingering illusions of family unity, and the facade that made my father's wrongdoings sit like thorns in my heart. I steeled myself against the coming tide of questions I had no answers for but would have to conjure something if I were to survive this day. I realized then that standing in that quiet room was not just a funeral for Aunt Ruth. It was a reckoning for every unsaid word hiding beneath the surface of my family. No, I might not have all the answers, but I knew deep down that something had to change, perhaps starting with me. With every passing moment, the oppressive atmosphere thickened as if it were a living entity squeezing down on my chest. The scent of lilies and damp earth swelled around me, heavy and suffocating. I fidgeted with the edge of my dress, the fabric clinging to my skin as fervently as the memories that enveloped my mind. Eulogies began, their words flowing like syrup, thick and slow, each one laced with platitudes and memories that felt foreign to me. A part of me felt wrong for even being here, my heart not attuned to the chorus of despair echoing through the room. I could hardly focus as my thoughts circled around the dark truth I had kept bottled up inside, a shadow lurking in the depths of my mind. Did any of these relatives really know what had flickered behind their smiles all these years? Did they even care about the turmoil lurking beneath our family's surface? As my cousins stepped forward, sharing stories of Aunt Ruth's kindness, I felt my blood begin to boil. How could they stand there, honoring her life with their sweet nothings, while we were drowning in the hypocrisy that engulfed our own? My mind raced, every detail of the past clanging together like dissonant notes in a symphony too chaotic for ear. I felt like a volcano ready to erupt, my emotions a potent mix of heartbreak and rage simmering right below the surface. I watched my father shift nervously in his seat, his hands clenched together as one by one our relatives shared their heartfelt stories. I could see the tenderness in their eyes, yet all I felt was anger. Anger at my father for hiding the truth, anger at myself for allowing this facade to continue, and most importantly, anger that we were honoring a woman who deserved so much more than to have her memory tainted by deceit. Ruth was the light of this family, someone said, their voice quivering with emotion. I could barely keep myself from rolling my eyes. She always put others ahead of herself. The words hung in the air, a sticky web of lies drawing tighter around me. Had they not seen, I thought fiercely. Had they not felt the chill creeping in when the smiles faded and the laughter dulled? My moment of clarity hit like a burst of sunlight breaking through storm clouds during the remarks of remembrance. As the crowd quieted down, I felt a tidal wave of conviction wash over me, rendering my fears impotent. I stood up, my legs shaking, hands quivering with urgency, but I could not hold back any longer. I cannot stand here and act like we are an epitome of family while there are shadows lurking in the corners, I proclaimed, my voice shaky but firm. The spotlight seemed to sear my skin, every gaze boring into me like icy daggers. My heart raced, the rhythm melding with the hushed silence. My father's eyes widened in shock, his lips parting slightly as he began to realize where my words were leading me. He looked older, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. I know about your indiscretions, Dad, I continued, feeling the tremble of my own voice. And I owe it to Aunt Ruth to be honest. The room shifted, a wave of disbelief rippling through my relatives. We are not the poster family for love and loyalty. It is time to face the music. Gasps filled the room, the collective breath of shock vibrating against my words like echoes bouncing off walls, voices of disbelief creating waves in a sea of silence. A distant part of me noted how stark the contrast was. My father sat stone-faced, while my mother's eyes widened practically out of her sockets. I could see the surprise morph into embarrassment and the shame seep into her brow. Her expression was a visceral reflection of my own conflicting emotions. I could no longer keep the truth bound within me. Dad, for too long we have lived in the shadow of Aunt Ruth's smile, not confronting what really happened. I took a step closer to him, my heart pounding louder than ever. You betrayed her trust, our trust. What are you doing? My father finally found his voice, thick with disbelief and fear. The murmured whispers around the room began to lose their muffled quality, escalating into a mosaic of opinions and judgments swirling around us. I'm not burying her in a lie today, I shouted, feeling the thrill of liberation course through me. It was intoxicating. You took everything from Aunt Ruth when you decided to betray her. Do you think this is what she would want? Fake grief and false memories, all while the truth festers beneath the surface. How dare you say this now? My father retorted, his voice rising in anger, rising and falling like waves crashing against a cliffside. This isn't the time or place for such accusations. I felt the air grow thick again, but this time with something different, tension electrifying the room. My pulse raced, the mix of fear and exhilaration rendering me dizzy. I knew part of me was challenging a force far larger than just my father. I was spitting back at the legacy that wove our lives together in lies. You say that, but when is it ever the right time? Aunt Ruth is gone. Do you think we can just sweep her memory under the rug like an old dust bunny? I could feel my chest heaving, every inhale and exhale becoming a rallying cry for truth and justice. Are we really here to honor a woman who would have risen against injustice? To honor her, we need to strip away these falsehoods. My mother's voice finally broke through the cacophony, trembling but stern. Mia, please, her plea echoed, filled with a desperation that echoed my own fears back to me. This isn't the way, this is exactly the way, I interrupted, the truth coursing through me like an electric current. I'm done lying for you and anyone else in this family. If we can't face the truth about Aunt Ruth's life, then what is even the point of this funeral? I threw my arms out wide, gesturing to encompass every fidgeting cousin and every tight-lipped aunt watching. What are we doing if not honoring a life of authenticity? As I spoke, I could see uncertainty creep into the faces of my relatives, like shadows flickering over the light. They had been given a choice: continue living in ignorance or confront the reality that I had upended. I dared to glance back at my father, his face an impenetrable fortress, though I could sense the cracks beginning to form. You dare act like you are the only one with secrets, he hissed, suddenly lowering his voice, his jaw clenched tight. You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted this? What do you know about sacrifice, Mia? I clenched my fists, every muscle taut with adrenaline. I know that I don't want to live a lie. I want to be brave enough to share the truth, to stand against the deceit that has plagued our family for years. A cousin to my left finally spoke up, her voice timid but growing stronger. Mia, I think what you're saying is important. We can't just ignore what happened. Her words seemed to fan the flames ignited within me. As more eyes turned to her, support began to ripple through a few of my cousins. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of camaraderie beam down upon me, this light I had been craving somehow illuminating the resolve that gathered in my chest. Thank you, I said softly, almost to myself, but loud enough to break the air of confrontation. We owe it to Aunt Ruth to be honest. We owe it to ourselves. The warmth of those words seemed to wrap around me like a protective cloak against the judgment I knew would come. My father's anger glowed like embers on the fire, still burning but subdued, uncertain. It was in that moment, with the whole family's eyes upon us, that I realized the extent of my own bravery. I had unleashed a truth that could no longer be contained. Why is it, I continued, emboldened, that we postulate about love and loyalty when all we do is tear each other apart behind closed doors? My heart raced as I held my ground, determined not to let fear rob me of this moment any longer. Faces shifted, whispers grew louder, yet within that chaotic atmosphere I felt a newfound confidence. My truth had found its voice. I turned away from my father, compelling my gaze across the room, meeting the eyes of family members who had remained silent until now, eyes widening as the cogs of realization turned in their minds. And there it was, an awakening for all of us, an opportunity to rise from the ashes of our collective silence and begin anew. It was time to expose the rot and face the music together. As I gazed into the shocked faces around me, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom taking root within my heart. The stillness in the air was palpable, electrifying, bearing the taste of adrenaline, almost as if the very particles around us were charged with unvoiced thoughts. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for someone to break the silence. I was no longer the meek Mia who sat silently in the shadows. I had transformed into a force that could no longer be ignored. The truth was my weapon, and in that moment it was incredibly powerful. It had a weight, a momentum that was unmistakable, echoing in the depths of my soul. The collective shock hung heavily in the air like a foul stench, sharp against the tender memories shared just moments before. Their eyes, my father, my relatives, those steadfast faces were a mixture of disbelief and dread, and I couldn't help but feel a flash of satisfaction at the chaos I had unleashed in the span of mere moments. It was intoxicating. I closed my eyes momentarily, inhaling deeply, letting the thick atmosphere seep into my lungs, a mixture of fear and liberation that set my core ablaze. When I opened my eyes, it was as if I had stepped into a surreal play, one where I knew all the lines and could finally perform them without fear of reprisal. Silence reigned supreme, and just as I was lost in that moment, I turned my back to my family, a symbolic act I had rehearsed in my mind countless times before. I had turned my back on the very things that once held me down, the fear, the facade, the unaddressed pain. It felt as though I had opened a floodgate. The truth poured forth, washing over me in torrents, cleansing me of the years spent suffocating under the weight of deception. My father shifted uncomfortably to my left, sweat beads forming on his brow as he tried to gulp down the reality I had unleashed. It was a futile effort, I knew, and I savored the sight of him struggling with his own actions, each bead of sweat a testament to his crumbling empire of lies. Mia, now is not the time, he protested, his voice strained and shaky like the last leaves clinging to a barren branch in winter. I could see his hand quiver, trying to control the tremor that threatened to break loose, and I recognized that look, defensive, desperate, like a man cornered by the dogs of his own making. But I could not let him diffuse what had just been said, not now. This was about more than just him. It was about the sanctity of family, about loyalty, and most importantly, it was about my mother, who deserved respect and love, not betrayal. No, Dad, the time to have this conversation had long ago passed. You made that choice, not me, I countered, my voice ringing with clarity that underlined my conviction. Each word fell like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the crowded hall. Do not shove this back into the shadows now that everyone is aware. It is time we accept the truth. In that instant, the murmurs began, whispers wrapping around each other like tendrils of smoke, filling the space with confusion. The crowd had frozen in disbelief, their faces wide with shock, yet I knew I was no longer fighting just for my mother. I was fighting for every family member who had ever felt crushed by the weight of hidden secrets, each one a specter in our home that we had ignored for too long. I reclaimed my spirit in that moment, steadfast and unwavering, no longer allowing this betrayal to extend its malevolent grip over my identity. The very air was thick with tension, a tangible surface over which my heart raced, beating with a newfound freedom I had scarcely understood before. Though my father was visibly shaken, almost crumbling under the weight of his guilt, what surprised me was my mother's stance. I turned to her, feeling a surge of fear and hope intertwine within me, only to see her step closer, trembling with emotions I could barely decipher, yet there was a flicker, a spark of ignited strength, a resolve to confront this together. Mia, I appreciate your bravery, she whispered, her voice echoing powerfully through the chaos, rising above the frightened murmurs. This has gone on long enough. Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no weakness within them. Instead, they shone with a glistening clarity, a reflection of the truth that had often felt hidden between us, tucked away under the guise of family loyalty. I let her words seep into my soul like soothing balm on an open wound, feeling emboldened by my mother's support. I stepped closer to her, feeling the pulse of her heartbeat against my own. At that moment, I understood my father's silence would not protect me any longer. There was no safety in the quietude that had shrouded our family. The burden of his choices would fall squarely on him, and I was determined that I would no longer carry the weight of keeping that secret. Do you have anything to say for yourself? I thrust the words at my father like arrows, the tension snapping taut between us. He opened his mouth as if wishing to form words, but nothing came. Instead, he simply stepped back, retreating into the shadows which were his defense. This is not just about you, Father, I continued, my voice gaining momentum. This is about the years of doubt, the hollow lies that permeated our lives like poison. You think I do not remember the tense evenings where your words were laced with secrets? You think I have forgotten the nights my mother cried herself to sleep because of your mistakes? My breathing quickened as I spoke, the anger fueling my words. Each mention of his failings ignited the flame of liberation within me. I lived in the shadows, watching everyone around me. While we pretended everything was perfect, I felt suffocated, stifled by the idea that our family was flawless. But we are not. Families are messy. They are complicated. Why can you not own up to that? My words echoed in the silent space, each syllable a blow aimed to shatter the wall he had built around himself. He finally managed, but I refused to let him finish. You want to know what the hardest part is? I questioned, my voice now softer but no less piercing. It is looking my mother in the eye every day, knowing that she deserves so much better than a husband who lies, who compromises the sanctity of our home. The hardest part is having to live with the knowledge of your selfishness. So no, this is not just about you, Dad. It started with you, but it will not end with you. The air shifted around us as confusion transformed into a sea of whispers. My family shifted in their seats, some glancing nervously at one another. I could see my uncle, a loyal ally in family games, biting his lip, his eyes darting as if contemplating the best way to navigate the raging storm unleashed before him. The stakes were higher than ever, human emotions swirled in a concoction of discomfort, guilt, and a growing sense of rebellion I could almost taste. I took another step forward, closing the distance. I have every right to be angry, to feel betrayed. Do not stifle my voice out of fear of what the truth might do to our image. You are not the only one who has lived in this family. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage as I bore the weight of my truth, the undeniable urgency of it settling firmly on my shoulders. In the depths of the silence that followed, I could see how deeply my words were sinking in. Among the shocked family members were those who had stayed silent, having cast aside their own feelings of disappointment and hurt for the sake of keeping peace. My mother was still beside me, that steady, near-constant presence, but I hoped her clarity could inspire others. Perhaps you all feel burdened by secrets too. Perhaps you are tired of the facade we have built up all these years, I yelled, my voice rising as it echoed off the rapidly fading remnants of the party. Who among us wishes to partake in this grand illusion any longer? I don't, my cousin suddenly blurted out, her voice slicing through the tension like a blade. I'm tired of pretending, Mia, you're right, we can't keep shoving everything under the carpet. Her admission seemed to open a valve like a dam bursting beneath pressure, and others soon followed. I don't either, a voice rang out from the back of the room, and I turned to see another family member, an aunt I had hardly connected with, standing tall, her face fierce with determination. This is our chance to rebuild, to be honest with each other. The warmth coursing through me ignited an even greater resolve. Yes, let us tear down the walls erected by fear and replace them with empathy and understanding. My father needs to face the consequences of his actions, just as we all must bear the weight of our own truths, I asserted, feeling more alive than I had in years. I turned my back to my father, who stood tight-lipped, a statue of shock, and cast my gaze around the room once more, tapping into their growing energy, willing them to join me. Let's do this together. Let us speak up. Who will take the first step? In that moment, filled with emotional upheaval, I felt a rush of certainty. This was not merely for my mother, my anger, my fight. It was for us all, an opportunity to reforge the bonds we had let shadows sever. Finally, a ripple of courage began to weave through the crowd, and it felt glorious. I gazed into their shocked faces and felt an overwhelming sense of solidarity taking root. The truth had a way of binding people, relentless and raw, and I knew that on that day, in that chaotic space filled with the scent of tension and awakening, we were not merely haunted by betrayal. We were instead aligning ourselves for renewed strength, echoing truths that deserved to be spoken. And as the air became thick with newfound courage, I realized the moment of reckoning had just begun. It was time for the transformation of both family and individual identity. No longer set by the shadows of the past, we were now walking toward the embrace of that light together. As my father's countenance shifted from shock to denial, I could sense the tension in the air fraying at the edges. The atmosphere felt electric, charged with the weight of unsaid words and long-held secrets. I had opened a door that could not be closed, thrusting my family into a reckoning they could no longer avoid. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat amplifying the reality of my defiance. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room turned toward us, mistrust and judgment swirling as he took a hesitant step back, the weight of shame hanging over him like clouds laden with rain. How many times had I wished for this moment, this confrontation, yet now that it was happening, a profound ache settled in the pit of my stomach. I did what I thought was best for the family, he finally spoke, his tone evasive yet tinged with sadness. There was an edge to his voice, a trace of desperation that hinted at the cracks in his carefully crafted facade. You simply do not understand the burdens that come with such choices. Those words washed over me, and I felt a hollow laugh bubbling up within. Burdened by choices that shattered us, is that what you call it? I shot back, locking my eyes onto his, no longer the little girl waiting for validation from a father, but a woman demanding respect and honesty. The air thickened with unsaid confessions, and I could see his struggle as he grappled with the truth laid bare, the flimsy defenses crumbling beneath the weight of reality. You have no idea what it's like, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. You think it was easy for me. A part of me wanted to scream that it wasn't about his burden. It was about the pain he'd inflicted on those he claimed to love. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks as I battled with my own emotions, wrestling with my desire to lash out and the deep-seated sadness that tethered me to him. You are right, I may never understand, I finally managed, my voice steadier than I felt. But I do know you made choices that hurt everyone involved. You chose to distance yourself from us. Now it is my turn to break free from the chains of your choices. As the silence engulfed us, I glimpsed my mother in the crowd and noticed how her hands trembled slightly, creating a soft rustling of fabric. I wondered if she could sense the seismic shift occurring in our midst, the delicate balance of our family fraying further with each syllable we exchanged. The storm clouds of silence had erupted, and with that the family members watched in hushed reverence as I took a step back from my father, a final act of distancing myself from the burden I had carried for far too long. A strange sense of clarity washed over me. It was as if the chains I had clung to for years, those forged in the fires of disappointment and manipulation, began to rust and peel away. I returned my gaze to the crowd, feeling lighter, almost liberated, as if a great weight had been lifted from my chest. As my relatives whispered and glanced amongst themselves, the undercurrents of emotion in the air shifted. I could sense a crack forming in the facade of our family's silence. The secrets that bound us now laid bare, revealing rawness and vulnerability that I had almost forgotten existed. In that moment, the spell had been broken. We were no longer bound by unspoken betrayals, but instead standing on the edge of understanding, a precipice that beckoned both fear and hope. My heart was racing, each beat heavy with the duality of what I felt, heavy yet unburdened, and I knew that I no longer felt shackled to an identity pieced together by deceit and pretension. I turned to my mother, who stood proudly by my side, and our eyes met with an understanding that transcended words. Her expression caught my breath. Tears filled her eyes, glistening like dew on a spring morning. But rather than sadness, they shimmered with a mix of admiration and relief. I stepped towards her, wrapping my arms around her, feeling her warmth seep into my bones, grounding me amidst the chaos of emotions swirling around us. "What happens now?" she asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper, reverberating with the weight of uncertainty that hung heavily in the air. The question hovered like a delicate butterfly, filled with both hope and anxiety. I pulled back to look into her eyes, filled with the fierce determination born from years of oppression and silence. "We reclaim our truth, we reclaim ourselves. It is time for both of us to heal, to stand tall." The words tasted both foreign and exhilarating on my tongue, each one an anchor in the endless sea of doubt that had previously threatened to swallow me whole. As I stepped away from my father, not looking back, I sensed the enormity of my decision settling around me like a cloak. I was leaving behind the wreckage of familial obligation, but more than that, I was leaving the anguish of a relationship defined by lies and unfulfilled promises. With resolute strides, I walked out of that funeral, my heart pulsing with purpose and dread. I had confronted my father's betrayal head-on, and in reclaiming my voice, I had set my spirit free. The air outside felt crisper, invigorating my senses as I emerged into the daylight. I took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth after rain filling my lungs, mingling with the freshness that followed a storm. I stood on the precipice of a new beginning, a future untethered by the past. I may not have known what the future held, but I understood one thing: I would no longer hide. I inhaled deeply, filling my chest with courage as I faced not just my father, but every lingering remnant of his choices. I would fight for the strength and truth that my family needed, even amid the decay of our lies. I thought of my mother, who had suffered so silently, always in the shadow of my father's secrets. Yet here she was, standing with me, a formidable force of resilience. For the first time in years, I felt a wave of hope coursing through my veins. This was a pivotal moment, a crossroads between despair and the possibility of healing. Turning back briefly, I glanced at the funeral, the site of our past buried beneath layers of grief and deception. The family members were still congregated, casting surreptitious looks, their expressions masks of uncertainty and judgment. But that no longer mattered. I had faced the demon of my past, and whether they understood my choices or not, the truth had been finally spoken. In that moment, I vowed to myself that I would embark on a quest, to reclaim every shred of my dignity, to dismantle the barriers that had kept my family shackled to old grievances. I extracted my phone from my pocket, contemplating the weight of the calls and messages I had neglected over the years. Friends I had silenced, connections I had let slip away, and an existence I had tucked away for far too long. Setting my sights forward, I felt a flicker of excitement sparking within me. What did it mean to rebuild? To forge a new identity forged from the ashes of betrayal? The air was thick with potential, and despite the enormity of the unknown ahead, each nerve in my body tingled with exhilaration as I imagined what could be. As I walked away from that funeral, a strong wind whipped around me, carrying away the last remnants of my past. A storm had swept through, but out of the chaos came clarity. I had unshackled myself from my history of hurt. For once, the silence that had draped over our family began to yield, revealing the possibility of redemption not just for me but for my mother as well. I realized that healing was not a destination but a journey, and I was finally ready to embark on it. Each step away from that place felt like a step toward freedom, as I committed myself to confront the fractures that had plagued me for so long. What awaited me beyond the horizon was still a question I could not wholly answer, but the certainty of one fact settled in my heart. I would not waver. This was my truth, my story to write, and I was finally ready to take the pen in my hands. As I walked away from the weighty atmosphere of that funeral, I felt a sense of liberation swirling around me, almost intoxicating in its intensity. The cold air embraced me as I exited the building, washing over my heated cheeks and grounding me in the present moment. I had taken the first step towards healing, not just for myself, but for the family I had torn apart. However, it was a necessary step. The chill wind tugged at my coat, and it felt almost like it was urging me onward, whispering that I was finally free. I paused at the top of the stone steps, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. The day was fading into night, the sky a brilliant canvas stained with hues of orange, pink, and deep indigo, painting a backdrop for the new journey ahead of me. In that moment, I understood that this was not just the end of one chapter, but the stirring of a new beginning. I drove home slowly, my mind still processing the waterfall of emotions I had unleashed during the service. The familiar streets of Hilton Grove blurred past me, illuminated with golden streetlights, but I was lost in thought. What would happen now? I turned the steering wheel as my thoughts drifted back to my father standing in stunned silence among the mourners. I could still see his expression, a mixture of disbelief and perhaps even shame. Had my words reached him, or would he remain cocooned in denial? I couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was just the tip of the iceberg. Would he find the strength to confront his own mistakes, or retreat back into his world of self-preservation? The questions hung in the air like the smoke from a candle extinguished too soon. When I arrived back at my apartment, I stood for a moment in the doorway just breathing. The familiar scent of old wood and the faint aroma of lavender from the candles decorated around my home greeted me warmly, pulling me back to reality. I felt the walls close in, each corner echoing thoughts of my past, but now they felt different, like old tapes I'd been forced to watch on repeat. The weight of my family's silence bore down on me, pressing against my chest, yet there was a new energy sparking within me, urging me forward. I dropped my keys onto the table, the clatter breaking the stillness, and exhaustion heavied my limbs. But beneath that heaviness I felt a thrill propelling me forward, a whisper of vindication that my voice had finally been heard. The betrayal I had endured from my father no longer dictated my sense of self. I stood there half-shrouded in darkness, and suddenly I was filled with a fierce clarity. I had claimed my identity back from the grasp of shame, and in that moment I decided. I picked up the pen that had rested idly in my drawer for too long and began to write, a decision that was as necessary as breathing. The pages of the journal became my sanctuary, a space where I could reflect, unearth hidden truths, and carve out my own narrative. The grip of my pen steadied my heart, every stroke on the page feeling like a step on a new path. Writing became my refuge, a way to pour my emotions onto the page. Dear Dad, I began in one letter, do you even realize the weight of your silence? Watching you stand there today, your eyes haunted, looking everywhere but at me, the silence between us screamed louder than any word you could utter. It was as if every unspoken apology you've bottled up turned into this suffocating fog that neither of us could navigate. I paused, breathing through memories that threatened to swallow me whole. But there was also hope, and I poured that into my letters. I want to start anew, one where I can still support Mom, but without the chains of our family name dragging down my spirit. Little by little, I could feel tendrils of hope intertwining with the grief and chaos that erupted during the funeral. I wrote about shared laughs with friends who were more like family, about quiet evenings filled with our dreams and fears. These words swirled around me like a protective cocoon. As days turned into weeks, I began to reach out to close friends who had supported me through the storms of my life. Each coffee shop visit felt like a lifeline, pulling me into shared warmth and understanding. I never thought I would need to break away from family to find myself, I confessed one day over steaming lattes. My best friend nodded, her expression mixing sympathy and strength. Sometimes you need to let go of who you thought you should be for your family to become who you truly are. Through this process, I realized that every shared story connected us in a web of resilience, weaving threads of understanding and compassion where loneliness had previously reigned. I began to nurture beautiful friendships, reveling in their authenticity while casting off the burdensome ideals of what family should have meant. We met in dimly lit cafes, laughing and shedding our masks. Can you believe we felt so trapped before? One of my friends remarked, and I remembered how I used to feel like a ghost in my own life, hovering between reality and what was expected. I held no illusions, healing is not a linear path, and every day I confronted moments of doubt. I often found myself staring at the blank pages of my journal, wanting to scream at the unfairness, but each moment of doubt, each ink-smudged tear soaking my pages, only solidified my resolve. In those moments I would write. With every turn of the page I felt my strength solidifying. Newfound courage bubbled up within me, filling me with the confidence of one who has finally stepped out from the shadows. Why did it take me so long to realize that I deserved to be happy? I wrote one evening, my hands trembling slightly as they flew across the paper. No more being a puppet on the strings of others' choices. I will forge my own path toward happiness. It felt like a vow, a promise. I envisioned life as a vibrant tapestry, one that I could weave with colors untainted by familial obligations. As autumn rolled into Hilton Grove, I found serenity in knowing that while I could not alter the past, I could craft a future I could be proud of. The leaves danced in the wind outside my window, and I thought about the beauty in change, the way nature sheds what no longer serves it. Just as they transitioned, so would I walked away from the funeral, not just breaking free from my father's betrayal, but forging a journey toward a life defined by authenticity. With every pen stroke, every heartfelt conversation, I reclaimed the strength that my family had buried in shadows for far too long. Each letter I penned was a brick laid in the foundation of my own story, steadying my resolve for what lay ahead. Dear me, I wrote in one of my more introspective moments, be kind to yourself, healing takes time and you are worth every minute. That evening, after all the writing and reflecting, I closed my journal and looked around my apartment, now suffused with a warm golden glow from the lamps I had switched on. A sense of purpose cocooned me, and I smiled softly, recognizing the beauty in my own journey. With a boldness I previously lacked, I finally felt ready to face whatever challenges would come next. I am me now, I whispered softly to the empty room, the walls echoing my newfound declaration. And in that moment of clarity I understood I had truly broken the chains binding me to my past, and I was finally beautifully free.